Have you ever wondered why you don't have fur? Why among all the mammals on Earth, humans are virtually the only ones walking around with bare, exposed skin? It seems like a terrible evolutionary mistake. Every other ape is covered in thick protective hair. Chimpanzees have it, gorillas have it, orangutans have it. Even our closest extinct relatives, Neanderthals, were probably hairier than modern humans. But you have a thin covering of fine hair on most of your body that serves almost no protective function at all. You can get sunburned, you can get scratched by thorns, you lose heat rapidly in cold weather. You're vulnerable to insects that other primates can simply brush away with their thick fur. This seems like evolution running backward, like natural selection forgot to finish the job. And yet, here you are, the hairless ape, the naked primate, walking around in skin that's completely exposed to the elements in ways that would be dangerous or fatal for your hairy ancestors. Here's what makes this so strange. Fur is one of the defining characteristics of mammals. It's been around for over 200 million years. It's incredibly useful. It regulates temperature, protects from sun and rain, provides camouflage, signals social status, and shields the skin from damage. Losing it should have been catastrophic. The first hairless human should have died of exposure or been eaten by something with sharper teeth. But that didn't happen. Instead, hairlessness spread. It became the norm. And now, millions of years later, you're lying there in clothes you need specifically because you don't have fur, in a climate-controlled environment you need specifically because you don't have fur, protected by layers of fabric and shelter that other animals don't require, because they came equipped with their own built-in protection. Something happened in human evolution, something so important, so advantageous, that it was worth giving up one of the most fundamental mammalian adaptations, something that made being naked better than being furry. And if you're using this to fall asleep, that's exactly why I make these videos. So maybe subscribe and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. I always check the comments and it's fascinating. Sydney at dawn and Chicago at midnight, London in the quiet hours before morning. All of us, hairless descendants of furry ancestors, lying in our beds covered in blankets instead of fur, wondering why we're the ones who lost what every other mammal kept. Over the next 2.5 hours, we're going to trace the story of human hairlessness backward through time. We'll explore the moment when your ancestors began to lose their fur, what drove that change, and why it ended up being one of the most successful adaptations in human evolution. We'll walk through the specific environmental pressures that made being naked an advantage rather than a liability. And we'll see how this single change, losing your fur, cascaded into other adaptations that eventually made you human. So settle in, let your breathing slow. The story of why you don't have fur is stranger and more important than you might imagine. And it starts millions of years ago, in a place where being hairless should have meant certain death. Picture this. It's roughly 6 million years ago. Somewhere in East Africa, the climate is changing. The vast forests that have covered this region for millions of years are beginning to shrink. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, over hundreds of thousands of years. The trees are thinning, open grasslands are appearing between forest patches. The continuous canopy that arboreal apes have relied on for their entire evolutionary history is fragmenting into islands of forest separated by savanna. Your ancestors are caught in this transition. They're apes, tree-dwelling primates who've spent tens of millions of years living in the forest canopy. They have long arms for swinging between branches, grasping hands and feet for climbing, and most importantly for this story, they're covered in thick, dark fur. This fur serves them well in the forest. It protects them from scratches as they move through dense vegetation. It shields their skin from the sun that filters through the canopy in dappled patches. It keeps them warm during cool nights high in the trees. It's a perfect adaptation for forest life. And like all their closest relatives, chimpanzees and gorillas and bonobos, they're thoroughly furry creatures. But the forest is shrinking, and your ancestors face a choice. They can retreat with the trees, staying in the remaining forest patches, competing with other apes for dwindling resources, or they can venture out. onto the savanna, into the open grasslands where few primates have successfully adapted. Some of them venture out. Not by conscious choice, perhaps. Maybe they're driven by hunger or population pressure or simple curiosity. But whatever the reason, they begin to spend time in the open, away from the protective canopy, under the full intensity of the African southern sun. And here's where the problem begins. The same fur that worked perfectly in the forest becomes a liability on the savanna. Because the African sun, unfiltered by leaves and branches, is relentless. It beats down hour after hour, day after day, turning the savanna into a furnace during the hottest parts of the day. And your ancestors, covered in dark fur, are basically wearing a thick insulating coat in one of the hottest environments on Earth. Their bodies heat up, they begin to overheat, and unlike the prey animals that evolved on the savanna, animals like gazelles and zebras with specialized cooling systems and behavioral adaptations for heat, your ancestors are forest creatures trying to function in an environment their bodies weren't designed for. Overheating is not a minor problem. It's not just uncomfortable, it's deadly. When core body temperature rises too high, proteins begin to denature. Cellular processes break down. The brain, which is particularly sensitive to heat, starts to malfunction. Confusion, disorientation, seizures, unconsciousness, death. This is the progression of heat stroke, and it can happen quickly, so your ancestors have a serious problem. The savanna offers resources, new foods, new opportunities, less competition. But accessing those resources requires spending time in an environment where their fur-covered bodies are at constant risk of overheating. Natural selection doesn't care about your comfort, it only cares about survival and reproduction. And in this new environment, the individuals who could stay cooler had an advantage. They could forage longer. They could hunt or scavenge during the hottest parts of the day when prey animals were seeking shade. They could travel farther without needing to stop and cool down. And slowly, generation by generation, the individuals who could regulate their body temperature more efficiently left more descendants. And one of the ways to improve heat regulation, counterintuitive as it seems, was to lose the fur. But here's what's important to understand. Losing fur wasn't the first adaptation. It wasn't the initial change. Because fur, despite making you hot, still provides crucial protection from the sun. Lose your fur too quickly before developing other adaptations, and you'd just get massive sunburn and skin cancer. Your naked skin would be even more vulnerable than your furry skin. So something else had to change first. Something that would make it possible to lose fur without immediately dying of sun exposure or skin damage, and that something was sweat. Specifically, a massive increase in the number and efficiency of sweat glands covering the human body. Let's pause here for a moment and talk about sweat, because you probably think of it as something mildly unpleasant. Something that makes you smell and requires deodorant and makes your clothes damp. But sweat is actually one of the most sophisticated cooling systems in the animal kingdom. And humans have more of it, and more efficient versions of it, than almost any other mammal. Most mammals have sweat glands, but they're typically concentrated in specific areas. Paw pads for dogs, limited patches on other animals. These glands produce small amounts of sweat for very specific purposes. Mammals primarily cool themselves through panting, which uses evaporation in the mouth and respiratory system to shed heat. But panting has limitations. It's metabolically expensive. It interferes with breathing, which is a problem if you're also trying to run or chase prey. And it's not very efficient at dealing with sustained heat exposure over long periods. Your ancestors developed something different. They evolved eccrine sweat glands over most of their body's surface. Millions of them, each capable of secreting watery sweat directly onto the skin. And when that sweat evaporates, it takes heat with it. This is evaporative cooling, and it's incredibly effective. But here's the key insight. Evaporative cooling only works well if the sweat can actually reach the skin surface and evaporate into the air. If you're covered in thick fur, the sweat gets trapped in the hair. It dampens the fur rather than evaporating from the skin. The cooling effect is minimal. The fur acts as insulation, preventing the heat from escaping and the sweat from doing its job. So your ancestors faced a trade-off. The sweat glands they were evolving would work much better with less fur. But losing fur would expose skin to sun damage. Unless the skin itself could adapt to handle sun exposure. And this is where the story gets more complex. Because losing fur required not just one change, but a cascade of changes. More sweat glands, darker skin with more melanin for sun protection, changes in the underlying skin structure to handle constant sun exposure, changes in behavior to avoid the most intense heat, changes in when and how they moved across the landscape. These changes didn't happen overnight. They took hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps millions. The fossil record can't tell us exactly when fur was lost because soft tissues like skin and hair don't fossilize well. We have to infer the timeline from other evidence, from stone tools that suggest changed behaviors, from skeletal adaptations that point to increased endurance and heat tolerance, from genetic studies that date the evolution of certain sweat gland genes and skin pigmentation genes. But we can be fairly certain about the sequence. First came increased sweating capacity, then gradual reduction of body hair, starting perhaps with areas where cooling was most critical like the torso and limbs, then darkening of the skin as melanin production increased to protect against UV damage, then further refinement of the sweating system and continued hair reduction until your ancestors looked essentially like you do now, nearly hairless, except for the scalp, armpits and groin. And this happened while other changes were occurring simultaneously. Your ancestors were becoming bipedal, walking upright on two legs. This posture exposes less body surface to the overhead sun and allows air to circulate around the body more effectively. They were developing larger brains, which generate more metabolic heat and require better cooling. They were beginning to use tools and develop cooperative hunting strategies that required sustained physical activity during daylight hours. All of these changes are connected, interconnected, each one making the others more advantageous. Bipedalism making sweating more effective, sweating making it possible to lose fur, losing fur making it possible to stay active during hot periods, staying active during hot periods making it possible to exploit new food sources providing energy for larger brains allowing more sophisticated tool use and cooperation, tools and cooperation making it possible to survive despite being hairless and relatively defenseless. This is how evolution works, not through single dramatic changes, but through gradual accumulation of small modifications, each one slightly advantageous in context, each one opening possibilities for further change. Now, let's get more specific about what was actually happening to your ancestors' bodies during this transition. Because the loss of fur wasn't uniform, it didn't happen at the same rate across the entire body. And understanding the pattern of hair loss tells us a lot about why it happened. If you look at your body now, you'll notice that you're not completely hairless. You have thick hair on your scalp. You have hair in your armpits and pubic region. You have fine hair called vellus hair, covering most of your body, though it's so thin and light-coloured in many places that it's barely visible. And you have slightly thicker hair on your arms and legs, though nothing compared to what chimpanzees or gorillas have. This pattern tells a story. The places where you kept significant hair are places where hair serves a purpose that's worth the cost. Your scalp, for instance. This is the part of your body most directly exposed to the overhead sun when you're upright. The thick hair on your head acts like a built-in hat, creating an insulating layer that keeps the sun from directly heating your skull and the brain inside it. Your brain is about 2% of your body weight, but uses about 20% of your energy. It generates a lot of heat, and it's very sensitive to temperature changes. Keeping your brain cool is absolutely critical. So while hair was being lost from most of the body to improve cooling, it was being retained on the scalp to protect the brain from direct solar radiation. The hair in your armpits and groin serves different purposes. These areas have high concentrations of apocrine sweat glands, which produce a different type of sweat than the eccrine glands covering most of your body. Apocrine sweat is thicker, more oily, and it doesn't evaporate as quickly. It's designed to trap scent molecules. The hair in these regions helps to disperse these scents, which play a role in social and sexual communication. So even as overall body hair was being reduced, hair was retained or even enhanced in specific areas where it served functions that couldn't be easily replaced by other adaptations. This is evolution being selective, not random, keeping what works, losing what doesn't in the context of the new environmental pressures. But let's go back to the savannah, to your ancestors spending increasing amounts of time in the open, their bodies gradually adapting to the heat. Because there's another piece of this story that's crucial to understanding why hairlessness became such a successful adaptation. And that's persistence hunting. Your ancestors discovered something that no other large predator on the savannah could do. They could run in the heat of the day, not sprint, they were nowhere near fast enough for that, but jog for hours under the midday sun when most predators and prey were seeking shade. Most mammals that evolved on the African savannah are adapted for either explosive speed or complete rest. They sprint when necessary, then retreat to shade and remain still during the hottest hours. They can't sustain moderate activity in heat because their cooling systems don't allow it. Panting while running is difficult. They overheat quickly during prolonged exertion. But your ancestors, with their sweating-based cooling system and increasingly bare skin, could maintain a steady jog even as the sun blazed overhead. And this opened up a completely new hunting strategy. They could track prey animals, follow them at a distance, keep them moving, preventing them from resting and cooling down. Hour after hour, your ancestors would jog along behind a kudu or a wildebeest, not fast enough to catch it, but relentless enough to prevent it from stopping. And eventually the prey animal would overheat. It would become exhausted, unable to regulate its temperature while running. It would slow down, stumble, collapse, and your ancestors would catch up and make the kill, not through superior speed or strength or claws or fangs, but through superior thermoregulation. Through their ability to stay cool while maintaining steady physical activity in conditions that would incapacitate other animals. This is called persistence hunting, and it requires several adaptations working together. Bipedalism for efficient sustained locomotion, large amounts of accessible water and the ability to carry it, since sweating depletes fluid rapidly, and most critically, effective evaporative cooling through sweating and hairlessness. Without fur, this strategy wouldn't work. A fur-covered human attempting persistence hunting would overheat and collapse long before the prey animal did. The loss of fur was the key adaptation that made this possible. And persistence hunting provided high-quality protein and fat that fueled brain growth and supported the energy costs of maintaining larger social groups. So hairlessness wasn't just about surviving in heat, it was about thriving in heat, about turning what seemed like a hostile environment into an opportunity, about finding an ecological niche that other predators couldn't exploit. Being the only large predator that could hunt effectively during the hottest part of the day gave your ancestors access to prey and reduced competition with other carnivores. But this adaptation came with costs, serious costs that had to be managed through behavior and culture, not just through biological changes. The first cost is obvious. Without fur, your ancestors were vulnerable to cold. And even in tropical Africa, nights can be cool, high altitudes are cold, rainy seasons are cold, and as your ancestors eventually migrated out of Africa into temperate and Arctic regions, the lack of fur became a potentially fatal vulnerability. The solution was fire and clothing, fire for warmth during cold nights, animal skins for protection from cold weather. These aren't biological adaptations, there are cultural innovations, tools and technologies that compensated for the loss of natural insulation. And the fact that your ancestors relied increasingly on cultural solutions rather than biological ones is itself significant. It suggests that brain power and social learning were becoming more important than physical adaptations. The second cost is sun damage. Even with darker skin, constant sun exposure causes damage over time. Skin cancer, premature aging, heat stress. Your ancestors had to develop behavioral strategies to manage this. Seeking shade during the most intense heat. covering skin when possible, moving during cooler parts of the day. These behaviours became essential for survival in ways they hadn't been for furry forest apes. The third cost is vulnerability to injury. Fur provides a layer of protection against scratches, cuts, and insect bites. Without it, every thorn bush, every sharp rock, every biting fly has direct access to skin. Your ancestors had to be more careful about where they moved through the landscape. They had to develop better wound care, better group cooperation to protect vulnerable individuals. And the fourth cost, perhaps less obvious but significant, is social. Fur provides visual signals about age, health and status. A healthy coat looks different from a mangy one. Fur colour and pattern can communicate information. With hair reduced to the scalp and a few other patches, your ancestors lost some of these visual cues. They had to develop other ways to signal status and health. Body decoration, scarification, eventually clothing and ornaments. The loss of fur may have driven the development of symbolic behaviour and artistic expression. But despite these costs, hairlessness spread. It became fixed in the human lineage. Every human population from the Arctic to the tropics is essentially hairless compared to other apes. There's variation in hair texture and density, certainly, but no human population re-evolved the thick body fur that chimpanzees have. The adaptation stuck because its advantages outweighed its costs in the environments where humans evolved and spread. And here's something to consider as you're lying there tonight. The fact that you don't have fur has shaped human history in ways that go far beyond temperature regulation. It necessitated clothing, which led to textile technology. It required fire for warmth, which enabled cooking and food processing. It drove migration patterns and settlement locations. It influenced social structures and cooperation requirements. It may have contributed to the development of complex language and culture as substitutes for biological adaptations. You are hairless not because of a single gene or a simple mutation. You're hairless because of a complex interplay between environment, behaviour, physiology, and social organisation that unfolded over millions of years. The loss of fur is written into every aspect of what it means to be human, and understanding why it happened helps explain why you live the way you do, why you need the things you need, why human societies developed the technologies and cultures they did. But we're just beginning this story. We've traced the initial loss of fur, the environmental pressures that drove it, the adaptations that made it possible, but there's more to explore. Because the question isn't just why humans lost fur, it's why humans lost fur while other savanna animals kept theirs. Why this particular adaptation became central to human evolution when other mammals solved the same heat problems differently. And to understand that, we need to look more closely at the specific circumstances of human evolution. The unique combination of factors that made hairlessness advantageous for your ancestors in ways it wouldn't have been for other species. We need to examine the alternative theories that have been proposed and evaluated over the decades of research into this question. So stay with me, let your breathing deepen. The story of your naked skin has layers we haven't uncovered yet, and each layer reveals something about what makes you human, about the long path that led from furry forest apes to the hairless, intelligent, culture-creating species lying in bed right now, wondering why you're the only ape that needs clothes. Before we can understand what really happened, we need to explore what didn't happen. Because the story of human hairlessness has been explained in many ways over the decades, and some of those explanations are fascinating, plausible, and ultimately wrong. The most famous alternative theory is called the aquatic ape hypothesis. And it's worth spending time on because it illustrates how compelling a wrong theory can be when it seems to explain multiple puzzles at once. It also shows us why scientific consensus forms slowly, after extensive testing and evidence gathering, rather than from a single brilliant insight. The aquatic ape hypothesis suggests that humans lost their fur not on the savannah, but in the water, that at some point in our evolutionary past, our ancestors spent significant time in aquatic or semi-aquatic environments, wading in shallow water, swimming, diving for food, living along coastlines or riverbanks where water was the primary environment. And if you think about it, this seems to explain several things about human anatomy that are unusual for primates. We're hairless, and most aquatic or semi-aquatic mammals are also hairless or have reduced fur. Whales, dolphins, hippos, manatees, they've lost most of their body hair. So maybe we did too for the same reasons. We have a layer of subcutaneous fat beneath our skin that's much thicker than other apes have, and many aquatic mammals have blubber or fat layers for insulation in water. Marine mammals in particular need this because water conducts heat away from the body much faster than air does. We have voluntary control over our breathing in ways that other apes don't. We can hold our breath, dive underwater, control our breathing for speech. And diving mammals have similar adaptations for breath control. We have a descended larynx, which changes the shape of our vocal tract and makes us more vulnerable to choking, but also enables complex speech. And some aquatic mammals have similar laryngeal adaptations. Human babies can swim before they can walk. They have a diving reflex that slows their heart rate and redirects blood flow when submerged, something that's shared with other mammals but seems particularly well developed in human infants. Put all of this together and you get a compelling narrative. Our ancestors, the theory goes, took to the water. Maybe they were forced there by predators or competition. Maybe they were attracted by rich coastal food sources. But whatever the reason, they spent enough time in aquatic environments that they evolved the traits we see today. They lost their fur because it's a hindrance in water. They developed fat layers for insulation. They refined their breathing control for diving. They became the aquatic ape. It's an elegant explanation, and when it was first proposed by marine biologist Alistair Hardy in 1960, and later popularised by writer Elaine Morgan, it attracted a lot of attention. It seemed to explain things that the savanna hypothesis couldn't fully address. It offered a different perspective on human origins, and it captured public imagination in a way that academic theories rarely do. There's only one problem: the evidence doesn't support it. Not the fossil evidence, not the genetic evidence, not the comparative anatomy evidence. And as appealing as the theory is, science has to follow the evidence, not the most interesting story. Let's look at why the aquatic ape hypothesis doesn't hold up. First, the fossil record. If our ancestors spent millions of years in aquatic or semi-aquatic environments, we should see evidence of this in the locations where fossils are found and in the adaptations those fossils show. We should find fossils in coastal or lakeside deposits. We should see skeletal adaptations for swimming or diving. We should see evidence of a diet heavy in aquatic foods. We don't. Human ancestors are consistently found in savanna and woodland environments. Their skeletons show adaptations for bipedal walking and running on land, not for swimming. Their teeth show wear patterns consistent with tough terrestrial plant foods, not soft aquatic prey. The isotopic signatures in their bones, which can tell us about diet, show they were eating land-based foods, not fish or shellfish. There's no evidence, anywhere in the hominin fossil record, of a semi-aquatic phase. No fossils found in coastal deposits, no skeletal adaptations for aquatic life, no dietary evidence for aquatic specialization. The fossil record consistently points to terrestrial savanna-dwelling ancestors. Second, the comparative anatomy. Yes, we're hairless like some aquatic mammals, but hairlessness has evolved independently many times in mammals for different reasons. Elephants lost their fur for thermoregulation on land. Naked mole rats lost it for living in underground burrows. Pigs have minimal hair for temperature control. Hairlessness alone doesn't indicate aquatic adaptation. And when you look at actual aquatic mammals, their suite of adaptations is completely different from what humans have. True aquatic mammals have streamlined bodies. We're not streamlined. They have modified limbs for swimming, flippers or webbed feet. We have hands and feet designed for manipulation and walking. They have eyes adapted for underwater vision. Ours aren't. They have specialized adaptations for diving, extended breath holding, blood chemistry changes. We have none of these in the forms that aquatic mammals do. The subcutaneous fat layer. It's not like blubber. Blubber is a specialized tissue with specific vascular adaptations. Our fat is ordinary mammalian fat that serves many purposes, including energy storage, endocrine function, and yes, some insulation, but it's not aquatic blubber. The descended larynx is not really descended in the way aquatic mammals are, and it's fully explained by the requirements of speech, not diving. The voluntary breathing control? It's nowhere near as sophisticated as what true diving mammals have. And again, it's fully explained by speech requirements. So the anatomical evidence doesn't support an aquatic phase either. We have some traits that superficially resemble aquatic adaptations, but when examined closely, they're either different in structure and function, or they're better explained by other selective pressures like speech, tool use, and terrestrial endurance. Third, the genetic evidence. We can now look at the genes involved in hairlessness, fat distribution, breathing control, all the traits the aquatic ape hypothesis tries to explain, and what we see are genes that have been under selection for terrestrial adaptations. Genes for sweating, for skin pigmentation, for bipedalism, for brain development, not genes for aquatic specialization. And the timing's wrong too. The genetic evidence suggests hairlessness evolved gradually over the past few million years, concurrent with the transition to savanna living and the evolution of larger brains and endurance capabilities. Not as a single event during an aquatic phase that should have happened earlier and left more dramatic traces in our genome. So why does the aquatic ape hypothesis persist? Why does it still capture imagination despite being rejected by mainstream anthropology? Partly because it's a good story. It's counterintuitive and therefore interesting. It offers a different perspective that feels fresh and rebellious against scientific consensus. And it seems to explain multiple puzzles with a single, elegant solution. But science isn't about elegant stories. It's about evidence. And the evidence clearly points to hairlessness evolving on land in response to the demands of endurance activity in hot environments, not in response to aquatic living. The aquatic ape hypothesis is a cautionary tale about how appealing incorrect theories can be when they seem to connect disparate facts into a coherent narrative. Now let's look at another theory, one that's less well known but addresses a specific aspect of hairlessness that's often overlooked. This is the parasite hypothesis, and it asks a simple but important question. Could humans have lost their fur to reduce parasite load? Fur is an excellent habitat for parasites. Lice, fleas, ticks, mites, they all thrive in the dense hair of mammals. They hide in the fur, feed on blood or skin, reproduce prolifically, and transmit diseases. For a furry mammal, parasite management is a constant concern. Grooming, the social behavior you see in primates where they pick through each other's fur, isn't just about bonding. It's functional pest control. And as human ancestors began living in larger social groups, sharing sleeping spaces, spending more time in close contact, the opportunity for parasite transmission increased. In a troop of 50 or 100 individuals all sleeping together, parasites could spread rapidly. The group becomes a perfect environment for parasite population explosions. The parasite hypothesis suggests that reducing fur reduced parasite habitat. Less fur meant fewer places for lice and fleas to hide. Smoother skin made it easier to spot and remove parasites. And if parasite-borne diseases were a significant cause of mortality, individuals with less fur might have had better survival and reproductive success simply because they were healthier. There's some evidence for this. We know that humans have 3 types of lice: head lice, body lice, and pubic lice. Genetic studies suggest that body lice, which live in clothing rather than on the body, evolved only about 170,000 years ago, right around the time clothing became common. Before that, there were only head lice and pubic lice, living in the remaining patches of human hair. The fact that body lice evolved to live in clothing rather than on the skin suggests that the skin had become an inhospitable environment for them. Too exposed, too easy to remove. The lice that survived were the ones that found refuge in the new artificial fur that humans created. Clothing. This is consistent with the parasite hypothesis. Humans lost their fur, which reduced parasite habitat. But they invented clothing for warmth and protection. And the parasites adapted to the new habitat, evolving into body lice that lived in the artificial fur of clothing rather than the natural fur that no longer existed. But here's the problem with the parasite hypothesis as a primary explanation for hairlessness. While reducing parasites is certainly beneficial, it's not clear that it's beneficial enough to drive such a dramatic change. Other primates have parasites too, and they didn't lose their fur. Grooming is an effective parasite control strategy that also serves important social functions, and fur provides protection against sun, cold, and injury that's hard to give up just to reduce pest populations. More likely, parasite reduction was a secondary benefit of hairlessness that evolved for other reasons. Once fur was reduced due to thermoregulatory pressures, the parasite load decreased as a beneficial side effect. This made hairlessness even more advantageous, but it probably wasn't the primary driver. There's another theory worth considering, though it's more speculation than serious hypothesis. This is the sexual selection idea. It suggests that humans lost fur because furless individuals were more attractive to potential mates. That somewhere in human evolution, bare skin became a desirable trait, and mate choice drove the spread of hairlessness. Sexual selection can produce some strange results. Peacock tails, enormous and unwieldy, exist because peahens prefer them. Deer antlers, metabolically expensive and sometimes dangerous, exist because does select males with impressive racks. Could human hairlessness have been driven by similar preferences? Could early humans have found bare skin more attractive than furry skin? It's possible. Bare skin makes it easier to see facial expressions and body language. It might have facilitated more nuanced social communication. It might have been seen as a sign of youth and health, since hair tends to coarsen and grey with age. And once a preference was established in the population, sexual selection could have reinforced and spread the trait rapidly. But this theory has problems too. Sexual selection usually produces sexual dimorphism, differences between males and females. If hairlessness was sexually selected, we'd expect to see clear differences in hair coverage between men and women. And while there are differences, they're subtle. Both sexes are essentially hairless compared to other apes. This pattern is more consistent with natural selection for a trait that benefits both sexes equally, like thermoregulation, than with sexual selection where one sex is choosing the other based on a specific trait. Also, sexual selection tends to produce exaggerated, costly traits because those traits are hard to fake and therefore honestly signal quality. Hairlessness isn't particularly costly in the environments where it evolved. It's actually beneficial. This doesn't fit the typical pattern of sexually selected traits, which are often costly handicaps that only the fittest individuals can afford to display. So sexual selection might have played a role in refining human hairlessness, making skin particularly smooth and bare, but it was probably not the primary driver. The main selective pressure was almost certainly thermoregulatory, with sexual selection and parasite reduction as secondary factors that reinforced the trend. Let's step back now and look at what all these alternative theories tell us. They tell us that human hairlessness is puzzling enough that scientists have proposed multiple explanations. They tell us that seemingly obvious connections like hairlessness and water can be misleading. They tell us that evolution is complex, with multiple pressures acting simultaneously, and that single-cause explanations are rarely sufficient. The current scientific consensus, based on fossil, genetic, and comparative evidence, is that humans lost fur primarily for thermoregulatory reasons, to improve sweating efficiency, to enable sustained endurance activity in hot environments, to exploit an ecological niche that other predators couldn't access. But this happened in the context of other changes: bipedalism, brain expansion, tool use, social complexity, and hairlessness interacted with all of these. It enabled persistence hunting, which provided protein for brain growth. It necessitated cultural adaptations like fire and clothing, which drove technological development. It changed social dynamics by altering visual communication. It created vulnerabilities that required group cooperation to manage. Evolution isn't a simple linear process with one change leading cleanly to another. It's a web of interactions, feedbacks, and cascading effects. Hairlessness wasn't just a response to heat. It was part of a broader reorganization of human biology, behavior, and ecology that transformed forest apes into savanna-dwelling, big-brained, highly social, technologically sophisticated hominins. And here's something that might help you sleep tonight. The fact that scientists have proposed and debated these different theories, tested them against evidence, refined and rejected them. This is science working exactly as it should. It's not weakness and mess that multiple explanations have been considered. It's strength. It's the process of converging on truth through careful evaluation of competing ideas. You don't have to feel anxious about uncertainty in scientific knowledge. The uncertainty is temporary and it's honest. Scientists say we don't know when they don't know, and they say the evidence suggests when the evidence suggests, and they update their understanding when new evidence emerges. This is far more trustworthy than claiming absolute certainty based on insufficient evidence. As you lie there now, you can appreciate that the story of your hairlessness is still being refined. New genetic studies might reveal additional details. New fossil discoveries might clarify the timeline. New comparative research might show connections we haven't recognized yet. The story isn't finished. Science is an ongoing conversation, not a completed monument. But what we know now, with high confidence, is that you lost your fur because your ancestors needed to stay cool while being more active during hot days than other animals could manage. This simple fact, this basic thermoregulatory adaptation, cascaded into changes that eventually made you human, made you capable of living in every climate on Earth, made you capable of developing the technologies and cultures and societies that define human existence. You're lying there now, hairless except for your head and a few other patches, covered in artificial fur, in climate-controlled shelter, connected to a global network of other hairless apes, all descendants of savanna-dwelling ancestors who discovered that losing their natural coat was the price and the prerequisite for becoming something new, something unprecedented in the history of life on Earth. Let that settle for a moment. Let the strangeness of it sink in. You're a mammal without fur, a primate that needs clothes, an ape that conquered the world not through strength or claws or fangs, but through sweating more efficiently than anything else alive. It's absurd. It's beautiful. It's the accident of evolution that made everything else possible. And now, having explored what didn't drive hairlessness, having examined and set aside the appealing but incorrect theories, we can look more closely at what did happen, at the specific mechanisms and timelines, at how hairlessness spread through human populations, at what genes changed and when, at how this one adaptation interacted with all the others to create the species that you belong to. The details matter, not because you need to memorize them or remember them in the morning, but because understanding the process, seeing how evidence accumulates and theories are tested and knowledge is built, that's part of understanding what it means to be human, to be a creature capable of investigating its own origins, of asking why and how, and finding answers that are stranger and more wonderful than the myths we once told ourselves. So stay with me, the journey isn't over. We've cleared away the wrong paths. Now we can walk down the right one, down into the details of when and how and why your ancestors became the naked ape, the specifics of the genes and the climate changes, and the behavioral shifts that transformed furry forest primates into something that had never existed before. Your hairlessness is written in your genes, in specific mutations and selections that can be dated and traced. And in the next part of our exploration, we'll look at that genetic evidence. We'll see exactly when the changes occurred. We'll understand the molecular mechanisms that turned off fur growth across most of your body while leaving it intact on your head. We'll trace the evolution of sweat glands and skin pigmentation and all the other adaptations that had to happen for hairlessness to work. The story gets more technical, but also more precise, more grounded in hard evidence rather than speculation, more certain in its conclusions because it's based on data that can be tested and verified. This is where science moves from educated guessing to reliable knowledge. And it's worth paying attention to, even as you drift towards sleep, because this is the true story of why you are the way you are. Let's shift perspective for a moment. Instead of looking at fossils or behavior or environment, let's look at something more fundamental: your DNA, the genetic instructions that built your hairless body. Because written in your genome is the history of how you lost your fur, the specific genes that changed, the mutations that spread, the timeline of when it all happened. This is where the story becomes precise, where speculation gives way to data, where we can say with confidence not just that humans lost their fur, but when and how, and which genetic changes made it possible. Your body is covered in hair follicles, millions of them. In fact, you have roughly the same number of hair follicles as a chimpanzee. This surprises people. You think of yourself as hairless, and chimpanzees as furry, but in terms of the sheer number of follicles, you're about the same. The difference is in what those follicles produce. Chimpanzee follicles grow thick, pigmented terminal hairs that form visible fur. Most of your follicles, except those on your scalp and a few other areas, grow vellus hairs. These are fine, short, often colourless hairs that are barely visible. They're there, you can see them if you look closely at your arm or leg in good light, but they don't provide insulation or protection the way terminal hairs do, so you didn't actually lose hair follicles. You transformed them, from follicles that make thick protective fur to follicles that make nearly invisible fuzz. This transformation happened through changes in gene regulation, through mutations that altered when and how follicle cells respond to growth signals. Let's talk about a specific gene, one that's been studied extensively in relation to human hairlessness. It's called the ectodysplasin A receptor gene, or EDAR. This gene influences hair follicle development, sweat gland density, and tooth shape. Variations in EDAR have been associated with differences in hair thickness and sweat gland density among human populations. East Asian populations carry a variant of EDAR called 370A that's associated with thicker hair shafts, more sweat glands, and differently shaped teeth compared to other populations. This variant arose about 30,000 years ago and spread rapidly through East Asian populations, suggesting it provided some advantage. Possibly better thermoregulation through increased sweating, possibly other benefits we haven't identified yet. But the broader point is this: relatively small changes in genes like EDAR can have significant effects on hair and sweat gland development. Evolution doesn't need to delete entire genes or create new ones from scratch. It can modify existing genes, change their expression patterns, alter their sensitivity to regulatory signals, and over time these modifications can transform fur into fuzz. Another gene worth knowing about is the hairless gene, appropriately named HR. In humans and mice, mutations in this gene cause complete hair loss. The gene is essential for proper hair follicle cycling. When it's disrupted, follicles can't maintain the normal cycle of growth, rest, and shedding. They produce malformed hairs or no hairs at all. Now, humans don't have mutations in HR that completely inactivate it. If we did, we'd have no hair anywhere, including on our heads. But changes in HR regulation, in when and where the gene is active and how strongly, could influence the transition from terminal to vellus hair across most of the body, while leaving scalp hair intact. Genetic studies have identified dozens of genes involved in hair development and maintenance. Changes in any of them could influence hair phenotype, and what we're seeing in the human genome is a pattern of small modifications across multiple genes, all trending in the same direction: reduced hair growth on the body, maintained or enhanced hair growth on the scalp. This pattern suggests gradual evolution, not a single dramatic mutation. Natural selection working over thousands of generations, favouring individuals whose gene variants led to slightly less body hair and slightly more efficient sweating. Each generation, the individuals who could stay cooler during prolonged activity left more descendants. And over time, the genetic variants associated with reduced body hair became more common. We can actually date some of these changes, not precisely to the year, but to rough time periods. And the timing is consistent with the fossil and archaeological evidence about when humans were transitioning to savanna living and developing endurance capabilities. One way we date genetic changes is by looking at genetic diversity. When a beneficial mutation arises and spreads rapidly through a population, it creates a pattern of reduced genetic diversity around that mutation. This is called a selective sweep. The beneficial variant, and all the genetic variants near it on the chromosome, increase in frequency together. This leaves a signature in the genome that can be detected and dated. Studies of skin and hair-related genes show evidence of selective sweeps occurring roughly 1 to 2 million years ago. This coincides with the emergence of Homo erectus, the first hominin species with body proportions similar to modern humans. Homo erectus had long legs, narrow hips, and barrel chest, body shapes that are efficient for endurance walking and running. They also had brain sizes significantly larger than earlier hominins. Larger brains generate more metabolic heat. They require better cooling. And the timing of the selective sweeps in thermoregulatory genes suggests that hairlessness and enhanced sweating evolved concurrently with brain expansion and the body proportions needed for endurance locomotion. All of these changes reinforced each other. Better cooling enabled larger brains. Larger brains enabled more sophisticated tool use and hunting strategies. Better hunting provided more protein to fuel brain growth, and so on. Another way we can trace the evolution of hairlessness is by looking at sweat gland genes. Humans have an unusual abundance of eccrine sweat glands. These are the glands that produce watery sweat for cooling. And the genes that regulate sweat gland development and function show signs of positive selection in human lineages. One gene family involved in sweat production is the aquaporins. These are water channel proteins that allow rapid water transport across cell membranes. Aquaporin 5 specifically is highly expressed in sweat glands and is essential for normal sweating. Variants in aquaporin genes that increase water transport efficiency would improve sweating capacity, and genetic evidence suggests these variants were favoured in human evolution. The timing and pattern of selection on sweat gland genes parallels that of hair reduction genes. Both show intensified selection roughly 1 to 2 million years ago, during the Homo erectus period. This is exactly what we'd expect if hairlessness and enhanced sweating were co-evolving, with each adaptation making the other more effective. Now let's talk about skin pigmentation, because this is intimately connected to hair loss. When you have fur covering your body, your skin colour doesn't matter much. The fur blocks most UV radiation, but when you lose your fur, your skin is suddenly exposed to intense tropical sun, and UV radiation causes serious damage. Sunburn, skin cancer, breakdown of folate, a crucial vitamin for DNA synthesis and cell division. Chimpanzees have light skin under their dark fur. This is fine when the skin is protected, but if a chimpanzee lost its fur, its light skin would burn immediately. It would be extremely vulnerable to UV damage. For humans to successfully lose fur, skin pigmentation had to increase in parallel with hair reduction. And that's exactly what the genetic evidence shows. The gene MC1R, which is critical for melanin production and skin pigmentation, shows strong signatures of selection in human populations. The ancestral state appears to be dark pigmentation. All African populations, where humans evolved, have dark skin. This makes sense. Dark skin, full of melanin, provides protection against UV radiation. The interesting thing is what happened when humans migrated out of Africa into regions with less intense sun exposure. In these environments, dark skin became a liability because it blocks UV radiation so effectively that vitamin D production is impaired. Vitamin D is synthesized in skin exposed to UV light, and it's essential for calcium absorption, bone health, and immune function. So in northern latitudes, selection favoured lighter skin that could produce adequate vitamin D despite reduced sun exposure. And we can trace this change genetically. Populations that left Africa and moved into Europe and Asia show evidence of rapid selection for skin-lightening gene variants. This happened independently in different populations, with different specific genetic changes producing lighter skin in Europeans versus East Asians. The key point is this: dark skin evolved in Africa concurrent with or shortly after hair loss. It was a necessary adaptation for hairlessness to be viable. Lose your fur without darkening your skin, and you'd be dead from UV damage within years or decades. The two changes had to happen together or in very rapid succession, and we can see this in the genetic timeline. The genes for enhanced melanin production in skin show selection signatures dating to roughly the same period as the hair reduction and sweat gland genes. Everything points to a coordinated transformation of the human body surface roughly 1 to 2 million years ago, driven by the transition to a lifestyle that required better thermoregulation. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Different human populations living in different environments show different patterns of hair retention and loss. This suggests that the evolution of hairlessness was somewhat flexible, responsive to local conditions. For example, populations living in very cold climates, like the Inuit of the Arctic, tend to have slightly more body hair than populations from tropical regions. Not dramatically more, they are still hairless compared to chimpanzees, but measurably more. This makes sense. In extremely cold environments, even a little extra insulation helps. And the thermoregulatory benefits of hairlessness are less important when you're trying to stay warm rather than cool. Similarly, populations with long histories in high-altitude environments, where UV radiation is more intense due to thinner atmosphere, tend to retain very dark skin pigmentation, even in regions where lower-altitude populations have lighter skin. This is local adaptation. Evolution fine-tuning the basic human pattern of hairlessness and dark skin to specific environmental conditions. These variations tell us that human hairlessness isn't a single fixed trait. It's a flexible response that can be modified by ongoing selection. The basic pattern, near hairlessness with enhanced sweating and initially dark skin, was established millions of years ago. But the details continue to evolve in response to local conditions, and this brings up an important point about how evolution works. It's not a process that happened in the distant past and then stopped. It's ongoing. Humans are still evolving. Your genes are under selection right now, and the traits that spread in your descendants will depend on the environments they live in and the challenges they face. Hairlessness is now universal in humans because it was so advantageous in the environments where humans evolved and spread, that no population re-evolved thick body fur, even when moving into cold climates. Instead, they developed cultural solutions, clothing and shelter. But within the framework of hairlessness, there's ongoing variation and adaptation. Slightly more or less body hair, slightly lighter or darker skin, slightly more or less efficient sweating, all of it responsive to local conditions. This is evolution at work. Not a march towards some predetermined goal, but a constant adjustment to changing circumstances, working with the variation that exists in populations, favouring what works and allowing what doesn't work to fade away. Now, let's look at one more piece of genetic evidence that's particularly fascinating. This is about head hair. The hair on your scalp that you kept even as body hair was lost. Human head hair is unusual among primates. It's not just that we have thick hair on our heads while having thin hair on our bodies. It's that our head hair can grow continuously to extreme lengths. Chimpanzee head hair grows to a certain length and then stops. It cycles regularly between growth and rest phases. Human head hair, in contrast, can grow for years before cycling to a rest phase. This is why you can have hair down to your waist if you don't cut it. This continuous growth pattern is controlled by genes that regulate the hair follicle growth cycle. And there's evidence that these genes have been under selection in humans to extend the growth phase of scalp hair, while shortening the growth phase of body hair. This would explain why you need haircuts but don't need to trim your arm hair. Why would long-head hair be advantageous? The traditional explanation is that it provides sun protection for the head and neck, the parts of the body most exposed to overhead sun in an upright bipedal ape. Longer hair creates better shade and insulation for the brain. But there might be additional factors. Long hair could be a signal of health and genetic quality. Hair growth requires good nutrition and metabolic health. Individuals who can grow long, thick, healthy hair are advertising that they have access to adequate resources and good genes. Sexual selection might have favoured longer hair as an honest signal of mate quality. Whatever the reasons, haired hair became a distinctive human trait, and the genetic mechanisms that produce it are different from what other apes have. This shows that hair evolution in humans wasn't just about loss, it was about reorganization, reducing hair where it interfered with cooling, maintaining or enhancing it where it provided protection or social signaling, creating a new pattern that hadn't existed before, and all of this is written in your genome. The mutations and selections and regulatory changes that transformed an ape's uniform fur coat into the varied human hair pattern of a hairy head, bare body, and strategically placed patches in armpits and groin. It's an evolutionary experiment that succeeded beyond what anyone could have predicted, because losing fur enabled everything else. It enabled endurance hunting. That enabled protein intake to support larger brains. Larger brains enabled better tools and social coordination. Better tools and coordination enabled more effective hunting and food processing. More effective subsistence enabled larger groups and more complex societies, and so on in a feedback loop that eventually produced the creature lying in bed right now, contemplating its own evolutionary history. Your hairlessness is not an isolated trait. It's a node in a network of adaptations, each connected to the others, each making the others more advantageous, each contributing to the overall transformation from forest ape to savanna-dwelling, big-brained, highly social, technologically sophisticated human. And the genetic evidence for all of this is accumulating. Every year, new studies identify additional genes involved in human hairlessness. They date the selection events more precisely. They trace the spread of beneficial variants through populations. They connect hair loss to other adaptations like sweating, skin pigmentation, brain size, body proportions. The picture gets clearer and more detailed. Not completely clear, there are still gaps and uncertainties, but clear enough that we can say with confidence, humans lost their fur roughly 1 to 2 million years ago, primarily for thermoregulatory reasons through gradual genetic changes affecting hair follicle function and sweat gland density, concurrent with changes in brain size, body shape, and behavior. This is the answer to the question we started with. Why did humans lose their fur while other animals kept theirs? Because humans were the ones who needed to stay cool while running for hours in the African heat. Because humans were the ones whose brains were expanding and generating excess heat. Because humans were the ones whose lifestyle created selective pressure for better thermoregulation that was strong enough to overcome the many benefits of fur. Other animals didn't face the same pressures. They solved the heat problem differently, or they didn't need to solve it at all. But for your ancestors, in their specific circumstances, at their specific moment in time, hairlessness was the answer. And once it emerged, once it proved advantageous, it spread. It became fixed. It defined what it means to be human. So as you lie there now, you can think of your naked skin as a kind of fossil. Not a fossil in stone, but a living fossil in flesh. A record of ancient selection pressures, ancient environmental challenges, ancient solutions that worked well enough that they're still here, still defining your body, still connecting you to ancestors who walked the African savanna millions of years before you were born. This knowledge doesn't change your skin, doesn't make you any more or less hairless, but it changes what your hairlessness means. Transforms it from a simple fact about your body into a window onto deep history, into a connection with the past that's written in every cell, expressed in every follicle, visible in every bare inch of skin. And that history continues. Your genes will be passed on or not, depending on your choices and circumstances. And the genes that spread in future generations will depend on what environments humans face, what challenges arise, what adaptations prove useful. Evolution hasn't stopped. It's just moved from fur to smartphones, from biological adaptation to cultural innovation. But the biological substrate is still there, still changing, still responsive to selection, and thousands of generations from now, if humans still exist, they'll look back at your genes the way you're looking back at the genes of Homo erectus, trying to understand what environmental pressures shape them, What adaptations arose? What problems were solved through genetic change versus cultural innovation? You're part of that continuum, that ongoing experiment in what a big-brained, hairless, highly social ape can become. The story isn't finished. The final chapter hasn't been written. You're living in the middle of it, carrying forward the adaptations that worked in the past, potentially contributing to the adaptations that will work in the future. And for now, for tonight, that's enough. The genetic evidence is clear. The timeline is established. The mechanisms are understood, at least in broad outline. You lost your fur for reasons that made sense in the environment where your ancestors lived. And that loss shaped everything else about what it means to be human. Rest now. Let the complexity wash over you. Let the deep time settle into your awareness. You're connected to millions of years of history through the simple fact of your naked skin. And that connection, that unbroken genetic line from furry ape to hairless you, that's something worth appreciating as you drift towards sleep. Here's the problem with carrying ancient X into today. You lost your fur millions of years ago to solve a problem that barely exists in your current life. You're not persistence hunting across the savannah. You're not endurance running in African heat. You're probably not engaged in sustained physical activity during the hottest part of the day, unless you're an athlete or labourer who specifically chooses to do so. And yet you're still hairless. Your body still produces massive amounts of sweat when you exercise or overheat. Your skin is still exposed to sun and cold and injury. You're still dependent on clothing and shelter in ways that other mammals aren't. The adaptation remains, but the environment it was designed for has vanished. This creates some interesting situations. Modern problems arising from an ancient solution, ways in which your hairlessness, once such an advantage, now creates challenges you have to manage through technology and culture. Let's start with something simple. Something you've probably experienced many times without thinking about its evolutionary roots. You're exercising at a gym, running on a treadmill, lifting weights, taking a fitness class, and within minutes you're sweating heavily. Your clothes are damp, sweat is running down your face, your back, your arms. You need a towel, you might need to change clothes afterward. And you look around the gym and notice something. Everyone else is sweating too. The whole facility is designed around the fact that humans sweat profusely during exercise. There are towel dispensers, water fountains every few meters, air conditioning running constantly. The equipment is designed to be easily wiped down because sweat corrodes metal and grows bacteria. The whole infrastructure of modern fitness is built around managing the copious sweat production that humans evolved for endurance activity. But here's the thing. You're not actually endurance running for survival. You're exercising for health, or aesthetics, or stress relief, or social reasons. The context has completely changed. The behaviour, sustained physical activity remains. But the purpose is different. And your sweating response doesn't know the difference. It activates the same way whether you're hunting antelope across the savannah or jogging on a treadmill while watching television. The ancient mechanism responds to exertion and heat, not to the reason for exertion. So you sweat copiously in climate-controlled gyms, even though the environmental heat stress is minimal. You sweat during recreational activities that have nothing to do with survival. This is evolution being unable to distinguish between ancient contexts and modern ones. Your body is following programs written millions of years ago, applying them to situations that didn't exist when the programs were written, and this creates a multi-billion-dollar industry. Athletic wear designed to wick sweat away from skin, antiperspirants and deodorants to reduce or mask sweat production, gym facilities with extensive climate control and cleaning protocols, sports drinks to replace the electrolytes lost in sweat. All of this exists because humans sweat so much more than other animals, a consequence of having lost our fur to enable persistence hunting in African heat. Think about that for a moment. A biological adaptation that emerged millions of years ago for a specific survival purpose now drives significant sectors of modern economy. Fashion, cosmetics, fitness, sports nutrition, all of them responding to consequences of your hairlessness and the enhanced sweating that came with it. Or consider this. You're at the beach on a sunny day. Everyone around you is wearing sunscreen, covering exposed skin with chemical or physical barriers against UV radiation. Reapplying every few hours. Some people are under umbrellas or wearing long sleeves despite the heat, trying to limit sun exposure. And you think about the paradox. Humans evolved in tropical Africa under intense sun. That's where hairlessness emerged. And yet, you can't tolerate prolonged sun exposure without protection. You burn. You risk skin cancer. You need artificial barriers against the very sun your ancestors lived under constantly. What's going on? If hairlessness evolved for heat tolerance, why are you so vulnerable to sun? The answer is that your ancestors had dark skin. Very dark. Full of melanin that absorbed and dissipated UV radiation safely. They could spend all day in the sun without burning because their skin pigmentation protected them. Hairlessness worked because it was paired with dark skin. But many modern humans don't have dark skin. As humans migrated out of Africa into regions with less intense sun, dark skin became a liability for vitamin D production. Selection favoured lighter skin in northern latitudes, and now descendants of those light-skinned populations are back in sunny environments, beach vacations in the tropics, outdoor activities in summer, and their light skin doesn't provide adequate UV protection, so they need sunscreen. Need to artificially replace the melanin their ancestors lost when they moved to cloudy northern climates. The adaptation, light skin, that was beneficial in Scandinavia or northern Europe becomes a vulnerability in Florida or Australia. This is another mismatch, not just between ancient and modern, but between the environment your recent ancestors adapted to and the environment you actually live in. Your skin colour might be calibrated for the UV levels of northern Europe, but you're spending weekends at the beach in California. Evolution can't keep up with the rapid movement of people across latitudes and climates. So you compensate with culture, with sunscreen and shade and warnings about sun exposure, and the skin cancer rates are high. Melanoma, the most dangerous form, is increasing in many populations, especially among people with light skin who spend significant time in sun. This is a direct consequence of the mismatch between skin pigmentation and UV exposure. An ancient adaptation, light skin for vitamin D production in low UV environments, causing disease in high UV environments. Your ancestors wouldn't have this problem, not the ones who remained in Africa with dark skin under African sun, and not the ones who moved to northern climates and evolved light skin but stayed in those climates. The problem is modern, created by rapid migration, by air travel and leisure time, and the ability to live anywhere regardless of your ancestral climate adaptation. Let's look at another scenario. You're hiking in the mountains, or walking through a forest, or working in a garden with thorny bushes, and you're wearing long sleeves and pants despite the warm weather, because you know that if you don't, you'll get scratched. Thorns will pierce your skin, branches will scrape you, insects will bite exposed skin. Other animals don't have this problem to the same degree. Their fur provides a protective layer. A cat can push through brush that would tear your skin. A dog can run through thorny areas that would leave you bleeding. Fur is armour against the countless small injuries that the natural world inflicts. But you don't have fur. You have naked skin, so you substitute artificial fur, clothing, fabric that acts as a barrier between your vulnerable skin and the environment. This is so normal, so automatic that you rarely think about it, but it's a direct consequence of hairlessness. And it's been this way for hundreds of thousands of years. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans have been using clothing since at least 170,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. The genetic evidence from body lice, which evolved to live in clothing rather than on hair, dates to about the same period. As soon as humans lost enough fur to be vulnerable, they invented ways to replace that protection. This is cultural evolution compensating for biological evolution. Instead of re-evolving fur, which would take hundreds of thousands of years and might not be possible given the genetic changes that already occurred. Humans invented clothing. They created artificial fur that could be put on and taken off, adjusted for different conditions, modified for different purposes. And this invention, born from necessity due to hairlessness, became one of the defining features of human culture. Clothing as protection, yes, but also clothing as status symbol, as artistic expression, as cultural identity, as sexual signalling. The entire fashion industry, the textile trades, the global commerce in fabric and thread and dyes, all of it traceable back to the fact that humans lost their fur and needed to replace it. It's a bit absurd when you think about it. Billions of dollars and millions of jobs, entire economies based on the manufacture and sale of artificial fur because actual fur was lost millions of years ago. But that's how evolution and culture interact. A biological change creates a need. Culture fills that need. And the cultural solution becomes so elaborate and multifaceted that it transcends the original purpose entirely. Now think about temperature regulation in modern life. You probably live in a climate-controlled environment. Heating in winter, air conditioning in summer. The temperature inside your home or workplace stays relatively constant year-round. You rarely experience the full range of temperature variation that the natural environment would expose you to. And this is necessary because you don't have fur. Other animals can tolerate much wider temperature ranges because their fur insulates them. A wolf can sleep comfortably in snow. A bear can den through winter without needing artificial heat. But you need shelter. You need fire or furnaces or heaters. You need clothing and blankets and all the technologies that replace the insulation that fur once provided. Your ancestors managed with fire and simple clothing and caves or constructed shelters, but even they couldn't tolerate the temperature extremes that furry animals can. They had to maintain fires constantly in cold weather. They had to seek shelter during storms and cold snaps. The loss of fur meant they became dependent on external heat sources and barriers against cold. And in modern life, this dependency has only increased. You don't just need fire. You need thermostats and central heating and insulated buildings. You need the entire infrastructure of modern climate control. Cities in cold climates are designed around the assumption that humans need heated indoor spaces. Architecture, energy systems, urban planning, all responding to the fact that humans are vulnerable to cold in ways that furry mammals aren't. This is another massive economic and technological consequence of hairlessness. The energy spent on heating and cooling buildings, the materials used in insulation, the engineering that goes into climate control systems, all of it necessary because humans lost their fur and never evolved it back. And there's an environmental cost too. Heating and cooling buildings consumes enormous amounts of energy, much of it from fossil fuels. The carbon emissions from keeping hairless humans comfortable in climates they're not well adapted for contribute significantly to climate change, which creates a feedback loop. Climate change alters temperature patterns, making heating and cooling even more necessary in many regions. It's strange to think that a decision evolution made millions of years ago to improve cooling in African heat now contributes to global warming through the energy demands of keeping humans comfortable in all the diverse climates they've spread to. But that's the nature of evolutionary mismatch. Ancient adaptations continue to have consequences, sometimes unexpected and far-reaching in contexts that didn't exist when the adaptations arose. Let's consider social and psychological aspects. Your hairlessness affects how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you in ways that go far beyond temperature regulation. Human faces are bare. This is unusual among primates. Chimpanzees have facial hair that grows as they age, especially in males. Orangutans develop elaborate cheek pads and beards. But humans, even adult males with facial hair, have much more visible facial skin than other apes. This makes facial expressions more visible. You can see subtle changes in skin color, blushing or paling. You can see fine muscle movements around the eyes and mouth. All of this contributes to the richness of human nonverbal communication. We're incredibly skilled at reading faces, at detecting slight changes in expression that signal emotional states or intentions. Would this level of facial communication be possible with fur-covered faces? Probably not. The loss of facial hair might have been crucial for the development of complex social communication. And complex social communication, in turn, might have driven further selection for bare faces and expressive features. This is another example of how hairlessness cascaded into other adaptations. Lose fur, become better at facial communication, develop more sophisticated social intelligence, become more successful in complex social environments, which favours further loss of fur to enhance communication even more. And in modern life, this plays out in countless ways. Job interviews where you're assessed partly on your facial expressions and eye contact. Dating where attraction is partly based on facial features and expressions. Social interactions where you're constantly reading and being read through subtle facial cues. The entire economy of cosmetics and skincare aimed at enhancing or modifying the appearance of bare facial skin. None of this would exist, at least not in current forms, if humans had retained fur-covered faces. The loss of facial hair shaped human social life in profound ways that we're still living with. And there are psychological dimensions too. Humans are preoccupied with body hair in ways that other primates aren't. We have cultural norms about where hair should be present or absent, how it should be styled or removed, what patterns are attractive or unattractive. We spend significant time and money managing body hair through shaving, waxing, trimming, colouring. Why? Partly because we have a baseline expectation of hairlessness. We're used to seeing mostly bare skin, so any hair that does grow becomes noticeable, subject to cultural standards and personal preferences. In a species covered in thick fur, individual hairs wouldn't be significant, but in a species that's mostly bare, every hair matters. And cultural standards about body hair vary widely. Some cultures favour complete removal of body hair except on the scalp. Others are more permissive. Standards differ for males and females, with females often expected to remove more body hair than males in many cultures. These norms are arbitrary, culturally constructed, but they're built on the foundation of a species that's already mostly hairless. Think about the grooming industries. Razors, waxing services, hair removal creams, electrolysis, laser hair removal. Billions of dollars spent annually on managing the small amount of body hair that humans still have. This is only possible because we're hairless enough that individual hairs matter, but still hairy enough that they need management. A chimpanzee doesn't worry about body hair grooming beyond parasite removal. A human spends significant time and money on it. This is a direct consequence of being in an intermediate state, mostly but not completely hairless, with cultural standards imposed on the remaining hair. And there's an interesting gender dimension. Human males typically have more body hair than females, though both are hairless compared to other apes. This sexual dimorphism, combined with cultural preferences that often favour female hairlessness, creates pressure on women to remove body hair that men aren't expected to remove. This is partly sexual selection. Human males, in many cultures, prefer less body hair on females. This preference might be rooted in the fact that less body hair signals youth and fertility, since body hair increases with age and hormonal changes. Or it might be purely cultural, an arbitrary standard that's been reinforced over generations. Whatever the origin, it creates a market. Hair removal products and services marketed primarily to women. Cultural expectations that require time and money to maintain. Psychological pressure around meeting standards of hairlessness that go beyond what evolution produced naturally. This is evolution and culture interacting in complex ways. Biological hairlessness creates a baseline. Culture imposes additional standards. Technology provides means to meet those standards, and individuals navigate the resulting landscape, trying to balance personal preference, cultural pressure, and practical considerations. Let's talk about one more modern consequence of hairlessness. This one's subtle but significant. You probably don't think of yourself as having a particularly good sense of touch. Compared to sight or hearing, touch seems like a secondary sense. But actually, you're very sensitive to touch, and hairlessness might be part of why. Fur-covered skin is less sensitive to light touch than bare skin. The fur creates a barrier, dampening fine sensations. Bare skin, in contrast, can detect very subtle stimuli. The movement of air, the brush of a fingertip, temperature changes, texture variations. Human fingertips are incredibly sensitive. You can read Braille through touch. You can feel the difference between fabrics that look similar. You can detect vibrations and textures with remarkable precision. This sensitivity is partly due to specialized receptors in the skin, but also due to the absence of fur that would otherwise dampen these sensations. And this tactile sensitivity has social consequences. Touch is important in human social bonding. Holding hands, hugging, other forms of physical contact. These wouldn't feel the same through fur. The intimate quality of skin-to-skin contact. The warmth and texture and subtle sensations. This is only possible because human skin is bare and sensitive. Would humans have developed the same patterns of social touch if we'd retained fur? Hard to say. But it's notable that human touch behaviours are different from those of other primates. We touch more, in more contexts, with more emotional significance attached to touch. And hairlessness might enable this. In modern life, this plays out in therapeutic contexts, massage therapy, which relies on direct skin contact, physical therapy that uses touch to assess and treat, even medical examination, where doctors palpate skin and underlying tissues to detect problems. All of this is easier and more effective with bare skin than it would be through fur. So hairlessness affects not just how you regulate temperature or protect yourself from sun, but how you experience touch, how you bond with others, how you're treated medically. It's woven through so many aspects of your life that you rarely notice it because you have no other reference point. This is just how human bodies are, bare and sensitive and dependent on clothing and climate control and sunscreen and all the technologies that compensate for lost fur. And as you lie there now, you might notice your skin in a new way, the way fabric feels against it, the temperature of the air moving over bare arms or legs, the places where hair remains, scalp and elsewhere, feeling different from the smooth skin around them. All of this is the inheritance of hairlessness. The body you have because your ancestors lost their fur to stay cool while running in African heat. The modern world you live in is built around this fact, shaped by it, responding to it. The clothes you wear, the buildings you inhabit, the products you buy, the social norms you navigate, all of it traceable back to the loss of fur millions of years ago. An ancient adaptation continuing to shape contemporary life in ways both obvious and subtle. This is the mismatch, the tension between what your body evolved to do and what you actually need it to do, between the environment you're adapted for and the environment you actually live in, between biological heritage and cultural present. And you manage this mismatch every day through choices about clothing and climate control and sun protection, through participation in industries built around compensating for hairlessness, through navigation of cultural norms about the hair you do have. It's so normal that it's invisible, but once you see it, once you recognize the pattern, it's everywhere. Your hairlessness shapes your life in fundamental ways. And understanding that, seeing the connections between ancient adaptation and modern consequence, that's part of understanding yourself. Part of making sense of the strange position you occupy as a tropical ape living in climate-controlled environments, dependent on technology to replace what evolution removed. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding brings a kind of peace. You're not broken for needing clothes or sunscreen or climate control. You're just hairless, adapted for a specific environment and lifestyle that no longer exists, making do as humans always have, with culture and technology and cooperation, finding ways to thrive despite mismatches, despite being built for a world that isn't quite the world you live in. This is the human condition, carrying ancient bodies into modern contexts, making it work, adapting, not through genetic change, which takes too long, but through cultural innovation, which can happen in a generation or less. You're still the naked ape. But the nakedness is manageable, survivable, even advantageous in its own way, because it forced the development of culture and technology that made humans capable of so much more than staying cool while running. As you're lying there tonight, perhaps you can see this differently now. Not as a loss, but as a transformation. Because yes, you lost your fur, but what did you gain? This might seem like an odd question. What could you possibly gain from being naked and vulnerable? From needing clothes and shelter and sun protection? From having skin that burns and freezes and scars easily? Seems like all loss and no benefit. Like evolution took something valuable and gave nothing back. But that's not how it works. Evolution doesn't trade disadvantages for nothing. If hairlessness persisted, if it spread to every human population, if it became a defining feature of your species, it must have provided something. Something worth the costs, something valuable enough that your ancestors who were hairless outcompeted their furrier relatives. So let's talk about the gifts, the paradoxical benefits of being the naked ape, not to minimize the challenges or pretend that hairlessness is all upside, but to see the full picture, to understand what you gained along with what you lost. The first gift is the obvious one, the original advantage of the superior thermoregulation, the ability to stay active in heat that would incapacitate other animals. This opened up an ecological niche that no other large predator could exploit. Your ancestors could hunt during the hottest parts of the day. They could maintain physical activity for hours in conditions that forced other animals to rest in shade. This is huge. This meant access to prey and resources that competitors couldn't get to. It meant reduced competition because other predators were sheltering from heat while your ancestors were working. It meant the ability to cover large distances, to migrate, to explore new territories, all while other animals were limited by their inability to cool themselves during sustained activity. Without this advantage, humans might never have left Africa, might never have spread across the globe. The loss of fur, combined with bipedalism and endurance physiology, made humans the most efficient long-distance travellers in the animal kingdom. You can walk farther in more diverse conditions than any other large mammal, and hairlessness is part of what makes this possible. Think about human migration. How your ancestors walked out of Africa and across Asia and Europe and eventually to the Americas and Pacific Islands. This wasn't fast travel, it were walking. Generation after generation, slowly spreading, covering thousands of kilometers over thousands of years, and they could do this because they could walk all day, even in heat, something that furry mammals can't manage as efficiently. So the first gift is mobility, freedom to move, to explore, to spread across diverse environments. This made humans the most widely distributed large mammal on Earth. And it all started with losing fur to improve cooling. The second gift is less obvious, but equally important. Hairlessness made culture necessary. Once you don't have fur, you need other solutions. Clothing for warmth and protection, fire for heating, shelter for climate control, tools for creating and managing these technologies. And this necessity drove innovation, forced your ancestors to become technologically sophisticated out of sheer survival need. They couldn't just curl up in a ball and let their fur protect them from cold like a cat or a bear can. They had to actively create solutions, make clothes, maintain fires, build shelters. This created selection pressure for intelligence, for planning, for cooperation. Making clothes requires processing animal hides or plant fibers, requires tools and techniques passed down through generations, requires social learning. Maintaining fire requires constant attention and resource gathering. Building shelters requires coordination and cooperation. All of these necessities driven by hairlessness favoured individuals who were smarter, more innovative, more cooperative. They created a feedback loop where technological dependence drove brain evolution, which enabled more sophisticated technologies which created new dependencies which drove further brain evolution. Would humans have become so technologically advanced if they'd kept their fur? Hard to say, but it's notable that the development of complex culture and technology in humans coincides with hairlessness. The two might be causally connected. Losing fur might have been the forcing function that made culture essential and therefore drove its elaboration. So the second gift is cultural sophistication, the necessity that mothered invention, the vulnerability that forced creativity. You're the most technologically advanced species on Earth, partly because you had to be, because you lost your natural protection and had to replace it with invented solutions. The third gift relates to communication. We touched on this earlier, but it's worth expanding. Bare facial skin makes expressions more visible, more nuanced, more informative. You can see subtle colour changes, blushing or paling, that signal emotional states. You can see fine muscle movements around eyes and mouth that convey meaning. This enhanced facial communication might have been crucial for the development of complex social intelligence, for the ability to read others' intentions and emotions, for the elaborate social coordination that human societies depend on. And it's not just faces. Bare skin elsewhere on the body also communicates. You can see muscle tension, posture changes, even subtle physiological responses like sweat or piloerection, the goosebumps you get when you're cold or afraid, remnants of fur-raising behaviour. All of this creates a richer information environment, more data for your brain to process about the emotional and physical states of people around you. And humans are exceptionally good at reading these cues, better than other primates, possibly because we have more visible cues to read. So the third gift is enhanced social communication, the ability to read and be read by others with greater precision than would be possible through fur. This supports cooperation, empathy, social learning, all the things that make human societies work. The fourth gift is sensory. Bare skin is more sensitive than fur-covered skin. You can feel textures, temperatures, air movements with greater precision. Your fingertips are incredibly sensitive organs, capable of detecting subtle variations that would be dampened by fur. This sensitivity enables fine manipulation. Tool use, craft work, all the detailed handwork that humans excel at. You can feel what you're doing in ways that would be harder through fur. You can detect when a stone flake is sharp enough, when a knot is tight enough, when a surface is smooth enough. Touch feedback guides skilled work. And beyond practical applications, enhanced touch sensitivity enriches experience. The feel of different fabrics, the warmth of another person's skin, the texture of natural materials, the subtle sensations of wind or water on bare skin. All of this is more intense, more informative, more present because your skin is bare. So the fourth gift is sensory richness, a more detailed, more nuanced experience of the tactile world. Connection to your environment and to other people through touch in ways that fur would mediate and dampen. The fifth gift is thermal flexibility. This might seem contradictory. Didn't we just say hairlessness makes you vulnerable to cold? Yes, but it also makes you adaptable, able to regulate your temperature across a wider range of conditions through behavioural and cultural means, rather than being locked into a single biological solution. Fur is inflexible. It's either there or it's not. It provides insulation year-round, which is great in consistently cold climates but problematic when conditions vary. You can't take fur off when you're hot and put it back on when you're cold, but clothing is adjustable. You can add layers or remove them. You can have different outfits for different conditions. You can precisely calibrate your insulation to current needs. This flexibility allowed humans to survive and thrive in climates ranging from Arctic to tropical, from deserts to rainforests. A wolf can't live comfortably in the tropics. Too much fur, no way to remove it. Tropical monkey can't survive Arctic winters. Not enough insulation, no way to add it. But humans can live anywhere, because they can adjust their artificial fur, their clothing, to whatever conditions they face. So the fifth gift is adaptability. Freedom from being locked into a single climate or temperature range. The ability to modulate insulation behaviourally rather than being stuck with whatever evolution provided. This is part of what made global human expansion possible. Now, let's talk about a more subtle gift, one that's psychological rather than physical. Hairlessness, and the cultural responses to it, created a human sense of self that's different from other animals. When you look at yourself, you see skin, bare skin over most of your body. And this skin is yours in a way that fur wouldn't be. It shows age, marks of experience, scars from injuries. It changes colour with sun exposure. It bears decorations, tattoos, makeup, ornaments. It's a canvas for self-expression. And the clothing you choose to cover that skin, that's also self-expression. Fashion, style, personal taste, the ability to modify your appearance daily, to present different versions of yourself in different contexts. This is only possible because you're starting with a mostly blank slate of bare skin that can be adorned and covered in countless ways. Would humans have developed the same sense of individual identity, the same preoccupation with self-presentation and appearance, if they'd remained furry like other apes? Maybe not. The flexibility of hairlessness, combined with clothing and decoration, might have contributed to the human emphasis on individuality and personal identity. So the sixth gift is selfhood, the bare skin that serves as a foundation for creating and expressing individual identity. The blank canvas that you paint with choices about clothing, decoration, grooming, presentation. This might seem superficial, but it's deeply connected to how humans think about themselves as individuals with unique identities. There's another gift we should acknowledge, one that's more speculative but interesting. Hairlessness might have influenced human aesthetic sense. Our appreciation of smooth curves and bare surfaces, our attraction to clean lines and minimal textures. Human art and architecture often feature smooth bare surfaces, polished stone, plastered walls, clean geometric forms. This preference might be rooted in familiarity with our own bare skin. We're used to smooth surfaces. We find them aesthetically pleasing in ways that might not be true for a species covered in textured fur. And human aesthetic preferences for bodies often emphasize smooth skin, clear complexion, visible musculature under skin. All things that are only visible on bare skin. Our entire sense of physical beauty might be shaped by hairlessness, favouring traits that can be seen because skin is exposed rather than hidden under fur. This is the seventh gift, if you can call it that, a particular aesthetic sense, a way of seeing and appreciating the world that's influenced by the fact that you're a bare-skinned creature, appreciating other bare-skinned creatures and creating art and environments that reflect this sensibility. Now, having listed these gifts, let's be honest, they don't erase the challenges. You still burn in sun, still freeze in cold, still need extensive cultural and technological supports to survive in most environments. The gifts don't make hairlessness easy or comfortable or ideal for modern life, but they do make it comprehensible. They help explain why hairlessness spread and persisted despite the costs, because the benefits, in the specific context of human evolution, outweighed the drawbacks. The mobility, the cultural necessity, the communication advantages, the sensory richness, the adaptability, the selfhood, the aesthetics, all of it together created a package that worked better than keeping fur would have. And this brings us to the question of making peace with it. How do you actually live with a body that's adapted for circumstances you'll never face? That's hairless for reasons that don't apply to your daily life. The first practice is simple recognition. When you're cold and you're reaching for a sweater, you can recognize this is what it means to be hairless. I need this artificial fur because I don't have natural fur. This isn't a personal failing. It's a species-level adaptation with species-level consequences. When you're applying sunscreen before going outside, same thing. Recognition. I need this protection because my skin is bare. This is the cost of the mobility and cooling efficiency that my ancestors gained. I'm managing an ancient trade-off with modern technology. This recognition removes the layer of frustration or judgment. You're not weak for needing a jacket. You're not vain for caring about sun protection. You're just hairless, navigating the practical realities of having bare skin in a world that sometimes burns it or freezes it. The second practice is appreciation. When you're able to do sustained physical activity, appreciate that your cooling system makes this possible. When you're traveling across climates with different wardrobes for different conditions, appreciate the flexibility that hairlessness enabled through clothing. When you're reading someone's facial expression and understanding their emotional state, appreciate that bare facial skin makes this communication possible. The gifts are real. They show up in your life daily. But you might not notice them because they're so normal. This practice is about noticing, about seeing the benefits that came with the costs, not to justify the costs, but to see the full picture. The third practice is curiosity. When you encounter some consequence of hairlessness, modern sunscreen products or heated buildings or social norms about body hair, get curious about it. Trace it back. See the connection to the ancient adaptation. Understand the chain of cause and effect that runs from hairless ancestors to this specific modern manifestation. This transforms everyday annoyances into interesting anthropological observations. Shaving isn't just tedious grooming. It's navigating cultural standards that emerged because you're hairless enough that individual hairs matter, but not hairless enough to eliminate them entirely. Buying a winter coat isn't just shopping, it's participating in a technology that humans invented because they lost their natural insulation millions of years ago. Curiosity makes these things less frustrating because they become comprehensible. You're not randomly burdened with nonsensical needs. You're experiencing the predictable consequences of your evolutionary history. The fourth practice is acceptance. Not resignation or defeat, but genuine acceptance that this is how human bodies work. You're hairless. This is permanent. It's not going to change through wishing or willpower or frustration. It's the body you have, the species heritage you carry. And with acceptance comes the question, given this reality, how do I work with it rather than against it? How do I manage temperature regulation effectively? How do I protect skin from sun damage? How do I navigate cultural norms about hair and appearance in ways that feel authentic to me? These become practical problems to solve rather than injustices to resist. The acceptance doesn't mean you love being hairless or think it's ideal, just that you acknowledge it's real and permanent, and therefore worth working with skillfully. The fifth practice is self-compassion. When you're struggling with some aspect of hairlessness, when you're cold or sunburned or frustrated with grooming expectations, speak to yourself kindly. This is a real challenge. Of course it's difficult. Anyone in this body would face the same issues. You're not failing at being human. You're succeeding at being a hairless ape in a world that's not perfectly suited to hairless apes. That's challenging. It requires ongoing effort and adaptation, and that's okay. It's not a personal shortcoming. It's a species-level reality. Self-compassion in this context means cutting yourself slack for needing the supports you need, for spending time and money on clothing and climate control and sun protection, for caring about appearance and grooming in ways that might seem superficial, but are actually responses to having visible bare skin. You're allowed to care about these things. They matter in a hairless species. And here's something worth considering. The fact that you need these supports, that you can't just exist naked in most environments, this created interdependence. You need clothing, which someone has to make. You need shelter, which requires construction and maintenance. You need fire or heating systems, which require fuel and technology. All of these needs connect you to other people, create webs of dependence and exchange and cooperation. A wolf doesn't need other wolves to survive cold weather. Its fur is sufficient. But you need the clothing makers, the builders, the energy providers, the technologists who create heating and cooling systems. You're embedded in social and economic networks precisely because you lack self-sufficient biological protections, and this interdependence might have driven the development of complex human societies. You can't be a solitary hairless ape. You need the group. Need the division of labour and specialisation and exchanges that allow some people to make clothes, while others build shelter, while others manage fire or grow food or create tools. Your vulnerability created necessity, and necessity created society. This is another gift if you squint at it right. Your hairlessness made you dependent, and that dependence made you social in ways that go far beyond what other primates manage, made cooperation essential rather than optional, made you into creatures who survive through community rather than individual self-sufficiency. So when you're bundling up in clothes someone else made, in a house someone else built, warmed by systems someone else maintains, you're not weak. You're participating in the fundamental human survival strategy, using culture and cooperation to compensate for biological limitations. This is what humans do, what you've always done, what hairlessness made necessary and therefore made possible. There's a sixth practice worth mentioning: connection. When you look at other humans, remember that they're hairless too. They face the same basic challenges. They need the same supports. They navigate the same trade-offs between ancient biology and modern life. This creates a kind of solidarity, a shared condition. When you see someone struggling with cold or dealing with sunburn or carefully choosing clothing, you're seeing your own challenges reflected. You're witnessing the universal human experience of managing hairlessness. And this can create empathy, understanding, a sense that we're all in this together, all descendants of the naked ape, doing our best to stay comfortable and protected and functional in bodies that require constant cultural supplementation. The connection extends across time too. Every human who ever lived faced these same issues. From your Homo erectus ancestors 2 million years ago to people living today across every climate and culture. The specifics vary, the technologies differ, but the fundamental challenge remains the same. How do you survive and thrive when you're a hairless primate in a world not designed for hairless primates? And every generation found ways, invented new solutions, refined existing ones, passed knowledge forward. You're part of that unbroken chain of problem-solving, adapting, surviving. The clothes you wear and the buildings you inhabit and the technologies you use, they're the latest iteration of solutions that began when your ancestors first needed artificial fur. This connection across space and time to every other hairless human, past and present, that's profound. You're not alone in your needs, not isolated in your vulnerabilities. You're part of humanity, sharing in the common inheritance of nakedness and the common project of managing it. As the night deepens around you now, you can rest in this understanding. Your hairlessness isn't random. It's not a mistake. It's the result of millions of years of evolution in specific environments facing specific challenges. It creates costs, yes, but also benefits, and you navigate both every day, mostly without thinking about it. The blankets you're under right now, artificial fur replacing what you lost, the climate control keeping your room comfortable, technology compensating for lack of natural insulation, the smooth skin you have where other apes have fur, that's your inheritance, the gift and burden of being the naked ape, and in a strange way this hairlessness connects you to every other human. Everyone faces the same basic challenges. Everyone needs clothing and climate control. Everyone has to manage sun exposure and temperature regulation. This is universal human experience stemming from a universal human trait. When you see someone bundled up against cold or applying sunscreen at the beach or carefully choosing an outfit, you're seeing them navigate the same inheritance you navigate. You're not alone in this. You're part of a species-wide adaptation to hairlessness, part of a collective solution to a collective condition, and this adaptation has been remarkably successful. Humans live everywhere, survive and thrive in climates ranging from Arctic to equatorial, do things that no other ape could do, create technologies and cultures and societies of stunning complexity and diversity, and it all traces back, at least partially, to the moment your ancestors lost their fur. That loss opened possibilities, forced innovations, created necessities that drove intelligence and cooperation, led to the development of culture as a survival strategy, enabled the global expansion that made humans the most widespread large mammal, contributed to the elaborate symbolic and communicative capacities that define human social life. You lost your fur, but you gained the world, gained the freedom to live anywhere, adapt to anything, create solutions to problems that other animals can't even perceive, gained the capacity for culture and technology that eventually produced everything from fire to cities to the device you might be listening to this on. Not a bad trade in the end. Even if it means you need a jacket and sunscreen and climate control, even if it creates daily challenges and expenses and concerns. The costs are real but manageable, and the benefits, the gifts that came with nakedness, they're extraordinary when you step back and see them clearly. So tonight, maybe you can make peace with your hairless body. See it not as lacking something other animals have, but as having something different, something that worked for your ancestors and continues to work for you, albeit with cultural and technological supports that weren't necessary in the African savanna, but are essential now. Your skin is bare, exposed, vulnerable in some ways, but also sensitive, expressive, adaptable. It's a different solution to the problem of being a mammal. Not better or worse than fur, just different, suited to different circumstances, enabling different possibilities. And as you drift towards sleep now, you can feel your skin against fabric. The temperature of air moving across bare arms or legs, the warmth or coolness of your sleeping environment. All of this is the experience of being hairless, of having a body that lost its natural covering millions of years ago and never got it back. But you're okay. You're warm enough, protected enough, comfortable enough. The cultural solutions work, the technological compensations function. You're surviving and thriving as a hairless ape in a climate-controlled, clothing-dependent world. And this is fine, this is normal, this is human. The other animals with their fur? They have their own challenges, their own trade-offs, their own limitations. Fur brings costs too, overheating in warm weather, parasite burdens, difficulty with fine manipulation, reduced facial communication. Every adaptation has downsides. You have different costs and different benefits, different vulnerabilities and different strengths, and the package works. It's worked for millions of years. It's working right now as you lie there, covered in artificial fur and climate-controlled shelter with a bare skin underneath. Let that thought settle for a moment. Let yourself appreciate the strange brilliance of being a hairless ape who compensates through culture, the vulnerability that became strength, the loss that became opportunity, the nakedness that became the foundation for everything that makes you human. Your ancestors who first lost their fur, who first felt the sun and wind directly on their skin without the buffer of thick hair. They probably didn't know they were starting something important. They were just trying to stay cool enough to keep hunting, keep surviving, keep reproducing. They were solving an immediate problem with whatever variations their genes happened to provide. But that immediate solution cascaded into everything else, changed the trajectory of human evolution, made possible the adaptations and innovations and expansions that eventually produced you, lying in bed, learning about the history written in your own bare skin. And that history continues. You're part of it, carrying forward the hairless body that your ancestors developed, passing on or not the genes that code for smooth skin and enhanced sweating and all the other traits that came with losing fur, contributing, in your small way, to the ongoing story of what it means to be human. The story isn't finished. Evolution hasn't stopped. Your descendants, if you have them, will carry these same traits forward. Will face new challenges that require new adaptations, will develop new cultural and technological solutions to ancient biological realities. The naked ape will continue to evolve in biology and culture, responding to whatever comes next. But for now, for tonight, the story rests. You can rest. The long journey from furry forest ape to hairless savanna runner to globally distributed, technologically sophisticated human, that journey has brought you here, to this moment, to this bed, to this particular body with its bare skin and cultural coverings and complex inheritance. And it's enough. All the struggles and adaptations and trade-offs that led to you, they're enough. You don't need to fix or change or transcend your hairlessness. You just need to live with it, work with it, appreciate what it enables while managing what it costs. Your skin, bare and sensitive and vulnerable and expressive, is perfect for the species you belong to. It's the skin that persistence hunters needed, that tool users needed, that global migrants needed, that cultural creatures needed. It's your inheritance, ancient and ongoing, connecting you to everyone who came before and everyone alive now. Think about it one more time. Every human you've ever met, Every person you've seen on a screen or passed on the street, every historical figure you've read about, all of them hairless, all of them managing the same basic challenge of surviving without fur, all of them part of the same extraordinary experiment that began millions of years ago on the African savannah, and all of you together proving that it works. That hairlessness, combined with intelligence and culture and cooperation, is a viable survival strategy. More than viable, spectacularly successful. You're the proof, lying there in comfort and safety, the beneficiary of millions of years of cultural innovation driven by biological vulnerability. Your ancestors couldn't have predicted where hairlessness would lead. They couldn't have imagined cities and climate control and global travel and all the elaborate technologies that would eventually arise from the simple necessity of staying warm and protected without fur. They were just trying to survive the next day, the next season, the next generation. But each small innovation, each technological advance, each cultural development built on the ones before. And over time, the accumulation of solutions to the problem of hairlessness created the entire edifice of human civilization. Agriculture to support populations that needed resources to make clothing and shelter. Trade networks to exchange materials and technologies. Cities to concentrate the specialists and craftspeople whose work kept everyone protected. Science and engineering to develop ever more sophisticated climate control and materials. All of it in some way traceable back to the naked ape who needed help staying comfortable. Who couldn't just be like a wolf or a bear but had to create, had to innovate, had to cooperate, had to build culture. And you're the inheritor of all that building, all that innovation, all that accumulated knowledge about how to survive and thrive as a hairless primate. You don't have to figure it out from scratch, you just have to participate in the systems that already exist. Wear the clothes, use the climate control, apply the sunscreen, navigate the social norms. It's easy, really. So much easier than it was for your ancestors who had to invent these solutions. You're born into a world that's already adapted to hairless humans. That's designed around the assumption that people need artificial protection and climate control. You don't have to convince anyone that you need a jacket. Everyone understands. Everyone needs one too. This is what success looks like for the naked ape. Not re-evolving fur. Not becoming biologically self-sufficient again. But creating a world where biological insufficiency doesn't matter. Where culture provides what biology doesn't. Where cooperation and technology make it possible to thrive despite vulnerabilities that would have been fatal without social support. You're living in that world, the world that hairlessness built, and it's okay to need what you need. Okay to depend on cultural solutions. Okay to be a creature who can't survive alone but who in community can survive anywhere. Sleep well, naked ape. Rest easy under your artificial fur and your climate-controlled den, with technology surrounding you that compensates for what evolution took away. You're exactly what you should be, hairless and human and managing just fine. The fur is gone. It's been gone for millions of years. It's not coming back. And that's okay, better than okay. It's the foundation of everything that makes you human. Everything that allows you to live the life you live. Everything that connects you to the long story of your species. So let it be. Let your hairless skin be what it is. Let the clothes and climate control and sun protection be what they are. Let the whole elaborate system of cultural compensation for biological vulnerability be what it is. Normal, human, fine. You're doing exactly what your species has done for millions of years. Surviving despite hairlessness. Thriving because of it. Finding ways to make it work. And tonight that work is done. The day's navigations are complete, the temperature is regulated, the skin is protected, everything is managed. You can rest now, the vigilance can soften, the concern can fade. Your hairless body has done its job for another day, carried you through another round of halogen changes and solutions and adaptations, and now it can sleep, recover, prepare for tomorrow's navigations. Tomorrow you'll wake up and do it all again. Put on clothes, adjust thermostats. Maybe apply sunscreen if you're going outside. Navigate the social world with your expressive bare-skinned face. Use your sensitive fingers to manipulate objects and communicate through touch, all the things that hairless humans do. All the adaptations and compensations that have become so automatic you barely notice them. But tonight, you've noticed. You've seen the pattern. You've traced the thread from ancient savannah to modern bedroom, from fur-covered ape to naked you, from biological loss to cultural gain. And maybe that knowledge settles something. Answers a question you didn't know you had. Why are you hairless? Because your ancestors needed to stay cool while running in heat. And that simple necessity cascaded into everything that makes you human. Everything that allows you to live the life you live. Everything that connects you to the ongoing experiment of being a smart, vulnerable, cultural, cooperative ape. An experiment that succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams. That's produced art and science and philosophy and technology and all the elaborate structures of human civilization. That's spread humans to every corner of the planet. That's created the complex, interconnected world you inhabit. All from losing your fur. All from being naked and needing help. All from vulnerability that forced cooperation and innovation and the development of culture as a survival tool. It's remarkable, really. The naked ape, the vulnerable one, the one who couldn't survive alone, becoming the dominant species on Earth, shaping the planet, reaching for the stars. All because you lost your fur and had to figure out how to survive without it. And you're still figuring it out. Still innovating, still adapting, still creating new solutions to old challenges, still building on the foundation that your ancestors laid. Still being human in all its hairless, culturally dependent, socially cooperative glory. Good night, descendant of the naked ape. May your dreams be warm and your skin be safe. May you wake tomorrow ready to face again the small daily challenges of being hairless in a world not quite designed for it. May you continue to thrive as your ancestors did, by being adaptive and innovative and culturally sophisticated. The fur is gone, but you remain, bare-skinned and brilliant, vulnerable and powerful, human in every hairless inch. Sleep now. The long story of hairlessness has been told, the mystery has been explored, the gifts have been acknowledged, the practices have been offered, and now nothing remains but rest. Rest in your bare skin. Rest in your artificial coverings. Rest in the knowledge that you're exactly what evolution made you. Exactly what your ancestors needed you to be. Exactly what allows you to live and thrive in the modern world. You're not broken. You're not lacking. You're not incomplete. You're hairless. And that's perfect. That's human. That's you. Good night.